We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
Not only will this tax plan pay for itself, but it will pay down debt.
There are moral and legal obligation questions that I think we'll have to wrestle with as a society.
When we as people go wobbly on the truth, we go wobbly on America.
All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done.
And this is only the beginning.
Good morning, everyone. You're tuned in to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM, WXIR in Rochester. This is Evidence of Design. I got to introduce who we have today. We have my good friend and co-host Matt Treadwell. If he were running for office, he'd be the only candidate to run on an anti-jobs platform. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Is it true?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. And also Mary Lawrence on the board, also good friend and co-host as well.
That's me.
Thanks so much for being here, tuned into your local grassroots community radio station. What are we talking about today? On today's show, we are getting into the latest budget proposed by the Police Accountability Board here in Rochester. The PAB has proposed an annual budget of $5 million. This would be a drastic expansion of the current funding the PAB receives. The PAB argues, and advocates for it argue, that the increased budget would allow it to do what it was tasked with doing by the voters who a few years ago voted to institute and create a PAB, a Police Accountability Board, here in Rochester, namely to investigate and resolve all allegations of police misconduct. There's around 500 a year here in Rochester, so the PAB argues that it needs more funding to do its job of investigating police misconduct, but also to reimagine policing here in Rochester, to reimagine how our criminal justice system works and how the police institution works to ensure that, well, we're not just protecting and serving in name, but citizens actually do feel safe, do feel secure, and that their rights are not being infringed upon by the continued episodes of police violence that we've seen throughout the country. So we're talking about the Police Accountability Board's proposed budget in the first half of today's show. In the second half of today's show, we're talking about the continued increase in the spread of misinformation and disinformation. This week, the federal government suspended the distribution of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine due to reports of blood clots in a very small number of people. That was a huge boon to vaccine skeptics, to right-wing trolls, and to, well, just the social media culture of favoring the spread of not true information. So we're going to get into vaccine skepticism on today's show and talk about what we can do to combat misinformation and disinformation, because golly, it has hit home for so many of us, including myself recently, finding tons of folks who just believe the most outlandish things.
You might even say that the misinformation is viral.
But we need the sound effect going here. Well done, Mary. Well done. Evidence of Design, we are all about critiquing economic inequality. We investigate the causes and critique the effects of economic inequality and advocate for solutions that would make our society more just and equitable. We really appreciate you joining us here, again, on 100.9 FM, WXIR. Mary, are we broadcasting through Facebook at this point?
We sure are.
Wonderful. So you can see our beautiful mugs on Facebook at Radio EOD. We are live streaming there, so you can see us inside of the studio and get in touch with us, both visually and auditorily. I don't know if that's the right word, but you get what I'm getting at.
Yeah, you can join us in the comments.
You can also comment. OMG, multimodal communication these days, folks. Really exciting. So Radio EOD on Facebook. Otherwise, if you're tuned in on the dial or on WXIR's tune-in page, we appreciate you being here. You can also communicate with us in the old-fashioned way, 585-219. Is that the right number?
8889.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
What I do is I just launch into the number, and then sometimes I'm giving my like personal cell phone or like a work number or like my friend's number. And then I have to check myself halfway through to be like, wait a second. Lizard brain, are you operating correctly? So good. 585-219-8889, 585-219-8889. Give us a ring or comment with us on Facebook at Radio EOD. Let's not waste another moment. Let's talk about the Police Accountability Board's proposed budget this week. As mentioned, the Police Accountability Board is a new institution formed in Rochester a few years ago. It was voted on by City of Rochester residents, and overwhelmingly, folks voted in favor of creating an independent Police Accountability Board. This replaced a previous kind of civilian oversight board of the police that was arguably largely toothless and kind of ineffectual for over a decade. And so the PAB replaced that. City Council kind of pushed that effort, and it exists now as an independent police accountability board led by a team of folks who are proposing to expand its budget to $5 million a year. If that budget was approved, the PAB would effectively be funded at a ratio of 1 to 20 to the RPD. So for every $20 the RPD gets in funding from the city per year, the PAB would get $1. That's that's just an interesting ratio. We're just sharing that to have in the back of your mind about context here and number play. So big increase for the Rochester Police Accountability Board proposed in this year's budget. Mary, let's get into this. Can you take us through kind of specifically what is in the proposed budget? What would the $5 million go to?
Absolutely, Jason. So this comes from the 85-page budget proposal, which I do want to mention is publicly available on the City of Rochester's webpage. So if you go to City of Rochester /PAB/budget, you can look at either a breakdown of this. There's kind of a summary, or you can get a link to the full report if you want to look this up for yourself. And have a little bit more of a visual. There is a handy chart in this proposal that describes where all of this money is going to be allocated. And generally, it's to four main areas. So within the Police Accountability Board, there are going to be three main branches. Those are the Bureau of Officer Accountability, the Bureau of Systemic Change, and the Bureau of Administration. So these each have, different responsibilities based on what was outlined in the city charter for the Police Accountability Board to do. The Bureau of Officer Accountability, which will take complaints, decide whether the Police Accountability Board has jurisdiction over those complaints, and then investigate and bring those to court. That will get almost half of the $5 million proposed budget. So about $2.3 million. And the Bureau of Systemic Change is going to be what's overseeing the police department and making policies that could change it in the future. That will get about $900,000 in this proposal. The third is the Bureau of Administration. So, of course, in any organization, you have to have an organizational structure. So you need people who are going to oversee. You need to have people who are making sure that everything is being done legally. And you need to have education and community outreach. So that's what that division does. And that will have another around $1 million. That does obviously leave a little bit of extra money. So about $850,000 is anticipated to go to other fees. So these would include training expenses for employees, public engagement, and translation and interpreting, so that everything that's being done will be available to communities who don't speak English.
It's a lot of proposals there. Big changes to the Police Accountability Board. Namely, Mary, you named the PAB proposing to establish 3 different bureaus. One bureau to investigate complaints against the RPD. One bureau to oversee and push changes to policing at large in Rochester. And another bureau to just oversee the PAB's general administration and to make sure that its operations are accessible, transparent, functional, etc. And again, you can read the PAB's budget proposal at cityofrochester.gov/PAB/budget. Mary, why have a PAB in Rochester? It's a lot of money going towards this institution. There was a lot of effort that went into creating a PAB, a lot of effort still out there, a lot of conversations about policing. Why should the PAB get money? What would it do with it, and how would it change society for the better, they would argue?
Sure. So this isn't the first time a civilian oversight board has existed in the city of Rochester. As you mentioned before, there was already a civilian oversight board that was formed, I think, almost half a decade ago, if not more.
I think the 90s or something, yeah.
The document says 1992.
Right.
That's when the one that was existing, but there was one even before that then dissolved, and then there was another one created. So it's not a new idea to have an oversight board. The issue with the recent one is that it was part of the RPD, the Rochester Police Department. So civilians who, I believe it was a board of 3 people, first of all, which is not big enough. And they were trained by the Rochester Police Department, went on ride-alongs, so it wasn't really a separate entity in the way it really needs to be to have appropriate accountability. And so the issue basically is that there wasn't enough accountability and transparency within the police department. We weren't, as a community, we weren't getting actual information on what was going on. Obviously, probably, I don't know anyone who's not aware of the killing of Daniel Prude last year. We didn't find out about that until months after it happened. And that's a really big issue. And those officers weren't brought to justice.
And by the way, we had the PAB then.
We did, yes. But it didn't have a budget.
No,
so.
totally. Yeah, no, I'm not poo-pooing the PAB. I'm saying, even with the PAB, there's still lots of things that one might not find out in operations of the Rochester Police Department.
Well, they have to be cooperative,
Exactly.
and that is, that's something that this is an enormous step to doing that, but the department still has to cooperate. So basically, this is to combat misconduct and bring officers to justice who do utilize their positions in a way that's violent or, takes advantage of people who are not in power.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Mary. I don't mean to poo-poo the PAB. I'm trying to say that it's not enough just to, hey, you have a PAB now, give yourself a pat on the head and go sit in your corner and not raise your voice anymore about potential police misconduct, right? You voted on the PAB, you have the VAB, everyone can go home now. This happens all the time in government and governing, where bodies, organizations that don't want to be scrutinized or audited will fight against having third parties, neutral arbiters take charge of investigating its conduct. And then if those things end up being created, these neutral third party arbiters that investigate their conduct, they'll try to sort of, make them toothless and remove their power. We saw this a million times in the Trump administration, notably in the CARES Act that was passed in 2020 and last year, when the government gave out millions and millions of dollars to businesses. The Trump administration tried to remove oversight of where that money went to. So essentially, there was this independent board that was created, and they removed sort of the oversight and auditing of that board to make it essentially toothless, feckless, and pointless.
And I think you guys pointed this out already, but this actually happened in Rochester before with the last Police Accountability Board, which was organized in 1963 and by 1970 had been dissolved by excessive legal battles with the Rochester Locust Club. So just because something is created doesn't mean that it's doesn't still need to be fought for and sort of, upheld.
Absolutely. And that's really the argument that's laid out in this budget proposal, is that without proper funding, this can't succeed in its goal. And I should also mention that one of the main aims of this budget proposal and the reasoning that $5 million is requested is that when the Police Accountability Board was created in the city charter, the kind of timeline for the goal of resolving complaints is 90 days. Obviously, we're seeing right now with the George Floyd murder trial, it has taken much longer than 90 days. And sort of the goal of the PAB is to receive, investigate, and adjudicate complaints within 90 days, while also creating policies for systemic change and educating the community. That's a lot to do. And without proper staffing, without proper resources, that would be impossible. And so the $5 million is to get proper staff, proper resources, and to have the time to be able to resolve these complaints within 90 days.
And you're tuned into Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. We're talking about the Rochester Police Accountability Board on today's show and their proposed annual budget of $5 million, which would establish 3 new bureaus, one of which would oversee all police allegations of police misconduct and resolve those complaints within 90 days. Another bureau would seek to lead the charge of reforming policing in Rochester, so lead the charge of taking community proposed solutions to policing and put them into effect. Another bureau would be in charge of making sure that the PAB is accessible, functional, and transparent. So in the first half of today's show, we're talking about the PAB on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. You can share your voice with us, 585-219-8889. We're also live streaming on Facebook at Radio EOD, where you can see us and leave your comments there. Mary, we've talked already that there's been different incarnations of the PAB in Rochester over the past half century, longer, and there's also different forms of civilian oversight boards of police in other cities and places across the U.S. My sense about the PAB here in Rochester is that it's actually pretty forward-thinking, that it is actually cited oftentimes I see as a potential model for other police oversight boards across the country. Did you get a sense of that in this budget, or what is your sense of how forward-thinking our own Police Accountability Board here in Rochester is?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. So that's something that's brought up quite a bit, that this has the potential, with the proper funding, or what they call sufficient funding, it has the potential to be really unique throughout the country. And the main difference is the amount of jurisdiction, the area of jurisdiction that the Rochester Police Accountability Board has. So it's really common for police accountability boards to have certain limits on what kind of claims they can investigate. And there are some examples in the budget proposal. I can't remember exactly which ones, but often civilian oversight boards are sort of limited to, for example, examples of police violence. So if someone is actually physically violent or breaks laws related to that. So there can be different limitations into what kind of complaints are able to be investigated. Whereas in Rochester, they're allowed to investigate any complaint at all that alleges conduct that violates a departmental rule, breaks a law, or is in general deemed inappropriate. So really, when we're thinking about how many complaints the Police Accountability Board would be taking in per year, which they estimate could be anywhere from about 400 to 1,200 a year based on what other cities deal with. So other cities like New York and Chicago specifically, that's a really big range. And of those 400 to 1,200, so say on the low end of 400, because they have such a high jurisdiction, they could actually have to investigate like 350 or 360 of those, where another police accountability board that doesn't have as wide an area of jurisdiction would maybe only be able to investigate half. So that's part of that first branch, which takes in claims, also has to decide whether or not the Police Accountability Board has the ability to investigate those. And again, in Rochester, the uniqueness is that they can investigate many of those claims. However, they still do not have the power to hold, to actually enact discipline on the police. So that is an important note.
Yeah, it's a huge caveat where the PAB does not have the power to discipline officers for misconduct. That power resides within the locus club, within the police union itself, I believe. And there's been
they can only
pressure.
Recommend.
Right, so the PAB can only say, well, it'd be great if you could do this because this officer did bad things. And then the locus club can say, yeah, but it was consistent with their training.
So the PAB is basically the boss from Office Space.
Right. You know, mistaking your handgun for your taser, it's consistent with their training. That's perhaps a really bad joke and taste, so perhaps I apologize for that, because of course that's citing another killing by a police officer. I don't even know if it was this week or if it was the end of last week at this point. But
I think it was this week.
An officer shot an individual because allegedly they mistook their handgun for their taser, which that's a novel excuse. I'll give them that one. Novel excuse. We'll see if it fits into the novel defense, the tried and true defense, I guess, so perhaps not so novel anymore, of saying that officers did nothing wrong because it was consistent with their training. So there are ongoing court battles, legal battles locally about whether or not the PAB can have some more teeth to oversee officer misconduct, what it can investigate, and most importantly, whether or not it can actually effectuate discipline. As of now, that answer seems to be no, with ongoing court battles between the locus club and the PAB. What is the sense, Mary? Do we have any sense of how likely it is that the PAB's funding could pass and actually end up in this year's budget?
You know, that I don't know. I'm actually not sure how that decision is going to be made. I'm not sure if it's voted on. So unfortunately, that's not something I'm fully aware of.
Yeah, and there's certainly a lot of folks out there who could be on the show and who could share their thoughts with us, who are much more well-versed in the PAB's function and local politics and debate, in which case you're most welcome to share your thoughts with us at 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. Or also check us out on Facebook at Radio EOD and leave us a comment there as well as we talk about the Police Accountability Board's proposed $5 million budget increase on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. What else should we know about the PAB, Mary? Is there anything else in its proposed budget that is worth paying attention to?
That's a really broad question.
And I want a specific answer.
Oh, boy. All right.
There may not be. I'm just curious what came out to you in the 80 or so page proposed budget. We've already covered that the PAB is proposing to establish 3 different bureaus that would organize its administration. I don't know if we cited the number, but I think they're proposing to expand the number of folks employed on behalf of the PAB to like 50 people, which sounds to me quite large, if I got that number right. You know, not large in a bad way, just large as in, wow, that's a lot of folks working on police accountability in Rochester.
Yeah, I think so. I already mentioned this a little bit, but I think what really struck me was the focus on the timeline, because that's not really something that I had thought about beforehand when, you know, especially when we were voting on the Police Accountability Board, which we did talk about on the show a couple years ago when it was first on the ballot. So this idea of reviewing, investigating, and adjudicating within 90 days is a really strong focal point. And that's how the budget really frames how they're going to pay for things. So they discuss, you know, $5 million is the minimum, actually. That's not, the maximum that they need. That's the minimum that they would need in order to succeed in going through these complaints within 90 days. And that's only the majority of them, right? So they also have this sort of chart in the budget proposal that discusses what could happen with different levels of budgets. So if they have a budget of, say, $7.5 to $10 million, that's a really high level of success where they anticipate being able to investigate these 400 to 1,200, and 1,200s would be insanely high for them to have to investigate in a year. That's a huge number of complaints.
That's also not a good reflection of
No, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Right? So so with a budget of $7.5 to $10 million, then they would have the highest level of success, right? Obviously, because then they could hire more people. They have to have lawyers on staff, and lawyers are not cheap. People who study law invest a lot in that, put a lot of time in that, and need to be paid well to reflect it. They also mentioned that they want to have a competitive rate for employees within the Police Accountability Board. And this was also something I hadn't thought about, but it makes a lot of sense. If you pay people a good rate, they're going to want to stay on. So one issue that might happen with civilian oversight boards is that people get burned out because there's too much work there. Because if there are a lot of complaints, there's a lot of work and not enough people to fulfill it. And so people end up leaving and there's a high turnover. Obviously, when you have a high turnover, not as many things can be as effective because you're having to spend time training people. So the idea is to offer a competitive salary that would allow for retention. So you train people one time, and then those same people stay on. And as they, go through training and go through more time, they become much better and more efficient at their jobs. And that would make a huge difference. So being able to offer a good salary out of the gate is much better than just having a high turnover, which wouldn't allow the agency to be as effective.
And I think one thing that contributes to a lot of burnout with these civilian boards, policing in general, is the negative effect of feeling like your work isn't going anywhere. Mm-hmm. So you spend all of this time investigating things, you spend all of this time compiling evidence. Sometimes you feel like action should be taken against something, sometimes you feel like it doesn't. In the event where you do feel like action should be taken against something, the powers that be, the structures as they are, prevent action upon making that change. And therefore you feel like, well, what gives? Why bother doing any of this work anyways when it's just a perfunctory performance of justice when that isn't actually going to happen. So I think also ensuring that the PAB has the teeth to actually do what voters voted on it to do is an important part. And we know that there are problems with policing in Rochester. We know it because the over 85%, it might even be in the 90s, I forgot the exact number, but it's on the RPD's its own data portal. Over 85% of City of Rochester police officers are white and live outside of the City of Rochester. So the vast, vast, vast majority of officers in the RPD do not look like nor live in, do not look like the residents they exist to so-called protect and serve, nor do they live in the community in which they are protecting and serving. That's a problem. We also know that the RPD has lots of officers compared to the number of people in Rochester, compared to other similarly sized cities across the country. The RPD is one of the largest staffed, meaning it has a lot more police officers than many other jurisdictions, including neighboring cities like Buffalo and Syracuse. And you might say, well, it's fine to have more officers so long as there's more crime, right? But if you compare the crime rates, that is not borne out either, where Rochester doesn't have a commensurately large increased amount of crime to equate to having that many more officers, 750 sworn staff in the RPD per se. So those are just kind of two technical, data-driven, systemic perhaps issues with the RPD, but also, of course, the actions and the lived experiences themselves of the people who live within the RPD's jurisdiction and a history of potential violence or misconduct. This is not to say that every officer does that. This is not to say that officers in the RPD do not do good work. I'm not saying that. I am saying that there are reasons to look into rethinking how policing works across our country and specifically in Rochester. And I think this is a win-win for everyone because it allows people to be more comfortable living their lives in their own skin and not face extrajudicial killings or violence or reprisal for things that aren't a threat to others in society, like getting pulled over because you have an air freshener hanging from your rearview mirror. And also, I think it's a win for officers too, so they don't have to respond to as many issues that are either mental health related or poverty related, because so much of what we see in policing is policing punishes poverty. And that's not, I think, why we want police to exist.
Absolutely not. And I think this certainly isn't an end point. You know, creating a police accountability board is not the answer to police misconduct in total. There still does need to be a huge reformation and a reimagining of what public safety is. This is, however, a good first step to that. And I think that's recognized within the accountability board itself. You know, they understand that this isn't like just, you know, taking complaints about officer misconduct is not the end goal. The end goal is reimagining public safety, and that is really what this is a first step towards.
Right, and that requires all of us, and that's why the PAB is meant to be a civilian-run, civilian-guided institution here in Rochester.
Right.
So we're going to end our coverage of the PAB's proposed budget increase there. You can read it yourself at cityofrochester.gov/PAB/budget. You're listening to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. For the remainder of today's show, we are going to transition to talking about vaccine conspiracy theories and the continued increase in spread of both misinformation and disinformation about many aspects of our society, but particularly we'll focus on vaccines. We'll be right back after a short break here on 100.9 FM WXIR. Hang on.
Mulberry Leaves by me.
By Sestrugi, which is Matt's band. And this is Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. Welcome back. Give us a thought. Give us
a thought.
Give us your thoughts right now. We want them.
Just one.
We will take them and eat them. I want your thoughts.
Did you say eat them?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I use Dream Eater for those who play Pokemon. So give us your thoughts. Sure.
Snorlax. No, not Snorlax. Drowsy Mane.
I'm replaying Pokemon Crystal right now, and I talked to this guy who gave me a TM for Nightmare. I forgot that was a moving Pokemon. Who would have thought that it was in the second generation Nightmare? Who knows, folks? If you want to talk to me about Pokemon, 585-219-8889. Or if you want to talk to us about more serious matters, I don't know. Pokemon's pretty serious to me. You can talk to us about vaccine conspiracy theories, or still share with us your thoughts about the Police Accountability Board, 585-219-8889. We're also live streaming on Facebook at Radio EOD. Yes, Matt.
Nothing.
Okay.
I was just thinking about Drowsy.
Just his name is exactly how I feel. The hook for today's topic on vaccine conspiracy theories is an NPR article. Don't get too excited there, folks, all right? It's called The Most Popular J&J Vaccine Story on Facebook. A conspiracy theory posted it. That is the title. Thank you. A conspiracy theorist posted it.
That's exciting.
Indeed. What's exciting about that, Mary? Name one exciting thing
I
about
like how
that
you
title.
agreed with her initially. You're like, oh, yeah.
What is exciting about that title, Mary?
I mean, exciting doesn't necessarily mean good, but it is like, it's intriguing. I want to know more. That's what I mean by exciting.
That's how they get you. That's how the conspiracy theorists get you, because you get excited. You're like, ooh, this is much more cool than a bunch of 3 people talking about budgets for police accountability boards. We're talking about chemtrails from airplanes, stuff like that. So that's how they get you, Mary. Don't latch on to the hooks.
I'm biting.
Does this look dangerous to you?
Thanks, SpongeBob. So that's an NPR article. Again, the most popular J&J vaccine story on Facebook. A conspiracy theorist posted it. It was written by Miles Parks, came out this week. Long story short, the hook to launch this conversation is they're writing about after the federal government this week announced that it would put a halt to the distribution of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine due to there being reports of blood clotting happening in women, actually, mainly women who have received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that they put a halt on the distribution of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to wait further studies to make sure that it's safe and efficacious for people to use. Well, it was a huge boon to conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers and right-wing trolls, and the NPR article cites how among the top of all the top stories shared about Johnson & Johnson on Facebook after the federal government put a halt on the distribution of the J&J vaccine, the number one story that was shared wasn't by the New York Times, wasn't by CNN, wasn't by even Fox News. It was by a conspiracy theorist.
What was the story?
Well, so here's the interesting thing. So a lot of times, conspiracy theorists can spread completely fake information, right? Think of an Onion article. Although Onion articles are satirical, so they're not fake news. They're meant to be funny and meant to be, cheeky.
Just like Tucker Carlson's show.
Right.
/ existence.
And Matt, of course, this is a much different discussion, but Matt, of course, you're citing something that we covered previously, which was how right-wing shows like Tucker Carlson, folks put lawsuits against Tucker Carlson for claiming that he spread disinformation. Well, he got off in court because his lawyer successfully argued that reasonable viewers of his show should not expect Tucker Carlson to be engaging in things that are meant to be taken literally. Or
an
whatever.
Oxymoron, reasonable viewers.
Yeah. So the idea is, no, you can't blame Tucker Carlson for the thing he says, because if you're viewing his show, you know that he's engaging in political innuendo, which of course is complete and utter tosh, because people watch Tucker Carlson and believe the things that he says. And the idea that there's a rational viewer out there whose job it is to discern truth from fiction shouldn't exist when you're watching a news article or a news program, right? Fox News. So anyways, that's a different discussion, but so keenly related in many ways. So when we're talking about the spread, Mary, of conspiracy theory, sometimes it's simply the spread of complete fake information. We saw this in the 2016 campaign. I mean, we see it all the time, but mainly in the 2016 campaign, where folks in Eastern Europe were writing just fake news for money because it got them clicks and ads, and they spread it throughout, the online discourse, and complete fake information. People read it, people follow it, people may or may not believe in it. Completely fake. However, in this case, that NPR was citing in this article with the number one trending information about Johnson & Johnson on Facebook after the federal government halted its distribution was actually a link to a CNN article. So it was a post that linked to a, presumably legitimate source, CNN, presumably legitimate source. CNN is not known for being in the business of spreading complete disinformation, right? They're a news organization. However, what is most commonly seen now with the spread of misinformation or disinformation in many ways is the disingenuousness of the poster in relating the context to the report. So I'm not perhaps explaining this well, but basically the person who posted this misleading tweet or Facebook post about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they linked a CNN article, but their context, their own writing in response to that article, was essentially fake. Or it was not correct. It was misleading. It was lacking the full context. It was disingenuous. And that is what we so often see nowadays with the spread of disinformation through social media, and it goes through the social media platforms' algorithms because it is linking to actual sources, like CNN articles or New York Times articles or other news source articles. The problem is it's the context that people are posting about in relation to the article is false, misleading, disingenuous, lacking context.
There is actually a specific name for it, which I am trying to find, but it is a common propaganda technique where you take something out of context and in order to use it in a malicious way. And this has come up in a lot of different situations. So this is a good example. I'll let you know if I find what it's called.
Yeah, and it's nothing fancy. This isn't a super intellectual phenomenon. The idea that you can say, I read in this one article this thing here, and this is why this thing over here does or does not exist. So, and I know I'm being vague here because I don't want to promote the misleading information that was cited in the article or the post, but it's basically saying something to the effect of, there is some evidence to suggest that vaccines can be harmful for people, and therefore, you shouldn't take them because they do more harm than good. That's super, super broad. But that is not at all borne out at the evidence. For instance, just in this example of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine causing blood clots in a few folks, I think when the decision was made to stop the distribution of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, there was 7 or 8 reports of blood clots. That's out of the millions of doses that were already distributed. 7 or 8 instances out of millions of doses distributed.
Also, one of the main common side effects of COVID-19 that people may not be as aware of because it is thought of more as a respiratory disease, but it is not just respiratory. It vastly affects the cardiovascular system and causes blood clots, which can cause things like brain aneurysms if the clot is formed in the wrong spot. So that's not to say, we shouldn't be concerned about a vaccine also causing blood clots. But if you get COVID-19, even if you are asymptomatic, there's still a strong possibility that your body is going to form blood clots. And we don't yet know the long-term effects of that. We don't yet know how long those clots are going to stay in your system, if they'll keep forming. And so, proving that a vaccine can cause them is only part of the picture.
Mary, I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is the funniest thing about this to me, is that you are literally more likely to get a blood clot that kills you from COVID-19 than you are to get a blood clot that kills you from the vaccine. Like, it is literally more dangerous to just get COVID than to get a vaccine. Guess what?
That's the whole point.
Point of vaccines, to lessen the severity of you potentially getting either sick with the illness itself, or to prevent the severity of the symptoms you get from the illness.
Yeah, but I think the thinking with that is that, like, for some people, getting the vaccine is, like, definitive. It's certain, Whereas, maybe I just won't get COVID, Maybe I'll just risk it.
Yeah.
And so, not to say that this is, like, smart, but, I can see how people sort of, some people could sort of rationalize in their heads that, one is riskier than the other, even though it's actually not.
Certainly. And to be fair and to be clear, we don't know the long-term effects of the vaccines yet. On the other hand, we don't know the long-term effects of COVID-19, and it's a lot more likely that you're going to die from COVID-19 or have a very severe case if you aren't vaccinated.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are asking, well, why should I have to get the vaccine for COVID? There are people, the flu kills lots of people every year. I might have not gotten the vaccine for that. The flu doesn't kill 500,000 people a year, nor does the flu cause the types of long-lasting issues that COVID-19 is causing people, whether it's continued respiratory problems, lack of taste or smell, depression or anxiety, cloudy thinking. The jury is still out on the long-term effects of COVID-19. You can say the jury is still out on vaccines. History does not support negative long-term effects of vaccines. History does not support vaccines causing long-term negative effects for people who receive them. I've received my recommended vaccine dosages my entire life. I do not have negative effects from vaccines that I know about. I'm a healthy individual.
You are, though, a little bit, like, on the spectrum, though.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a third eye in the back of my head. Besides that, I'm healthy as a horse.
Yeah.
Can we talk about some of the things that people are saying to support this conspiracy theory, or why people are believing it?
Yeah. So thanks, Mary, for backing us up from the specificity of this. So the reason why we want to just raise the awareness again about misinformation and disinformation is because I have been struck in having conversations with people close to me, people who I see as sort of normal people. Normal, of course, being a problematic term.
What does that mean?
Exactly. Problematic term. Everyday American, normal person, normal Joe, right? Whatever. People who I interact with on a daily basis and can have good reciprocal relationships with. Those sorts of people.
Your everyday acquaintances.
Indeed. I've been struck by some of their beliefs recently in regards to not just vaccines, but government control, conspiracies. I know that we as a culture and as a society are struggling right now with a crisis of trust and knowledge.
I was going to say education.
Yeah, so what we are struggling with is an epistemological crisis. What that epistemology means, the study of learning, of knowing, of knowledge. That's what it means. And we're having a struggle as a society of discerning truth from falsehood, of knowing trustworthy sources versus untrustworthy sources, of knowing what are helpful, productive steps, what we can take as a society to move us forward in a hopefully a mutually agreeable way, versus steps that might take us backwards or sideways. And of course, we have to have a shared definition of what moving forward means and of what we all want as a society. That is super hard right now when we're so fractured and politically polarized. And that's because this is all part of the same stew. It's all part of the same soup. And that we've talked before about how our culture and society, if it were diagnosed by a doctor, we would be a very sick patient right now. We would be a very, very sick patient. And the treatment to get us out of being a very sick patient is being a fractured and confused and untrustworthy society. That's the question, is what do we do to get through that? I would propose that we promote things like economic justice. We propose giving people the guarantees of meeting their basic material needs, so that people aren't struggling to get by every day, so they're not feeling ripped off by elites or the 1% or whatever, and also so people are not drawn to other ways of giving meaning in their lives, such as conspiracies. My tendency is to believe that people who believe in conspiracies might not feel like they have control or ownership over their lives, and therefore they can invent their own reality and find things to give more meaning to them than what is traditionally provided to them to our current broken institutions.
I want to point out that, I think something that we don't talk a lot about, especially in mainstream media when it comes to things like this, is that I think part of the reason why conspiracy theories thrive so easily in contemporary parlance is because our history and our society is riven with examples of actual conspiracies. Of actual examples in which the public faith placed in institutions and organizations has been shown to be misplaced. Johnson & Johnson itself is no stranger to this, with their talcum-based baby products having been linked to cancer, costing the company, billions and billions of dollars in lawsuits over the years. And I'm actually looking at their Wikipedia page right now, and it says that internal documents have shown that the company had known about asbestos contamination in their baby products since as early as 1971 and had spent decades finding ways to conceal the evidence from the public. So, I'm not saying that necessarily everybody who consumed this particular conspiracy theory on the vaccine knew that or had that in the back of their mind, but I think there is a general sort of collective unconscious understanding that things are unfair, and that stems from living in a capitalist system that prioritizes profit and exploitation, and people are just used now to getting screwed. And they think that things are weighed against them because they are.
Yeah, things totally are. And so here's the key point, Matt. For these individuals that I cited as an example of being surprised at their susceptibility and belief in conspiracy theories, they too share the belief with me that things are skewed against them, that things are skewed against us. Because, as you said, Matt, they are. And they too share with me the belief that our society is economically unequal and that we're getting ripped off. The problem is that unlike us on Evidence of Design, where we argue for reframing, for redoing, for reformatting capitalism to provide for more basic goods and material benefits and to lessen greed, instead of advocating for that future, which is one that we believe on Evidence of Design will actually reasonably, objectively, factually, legitimately, helpfully help everyone out in society, these folks believe in stuff that isn't helpful at all. And it's complete fact and fiction. So we can agree on the basic premises. Society is broken, society is fractured, we're getting ripped off. But then the question is, what do you do with that information? Do you go down the path, say, of wanting to reframe capitalism to stop having companies rip you off, like Johnson & Johnson, to stop having Purdue Pharma get half the country addicted on opioids, to stop having the oil and gas industry prevent action on climate change by telling you that fossil fuels aren't harmful? Do you want to fight against the tobacco company for hiding the harmful effects of nicotine, causing lung cancer in untold numbers of people? The list goes on and on of you getting screwed over by companies and politicians who support corporate greed over human rights and lives, right? The question is, do you want to do something about that and use the power of government to regulate corporations and to invest in human rights and decency, or do you want to believe in tosh like disinformation and misinformation on social media and all these other outlandish claims about a deep state and pedophiles and chemtrails left by airplanes and vaccines being microchipped with 5G and Bill Gates and George Soros and all of that crap? It's crap, you know? And so we can agree on the same facts, but what leads you down to that path to believing crap as opposed to believing in stuff that we think on this show would actually change society by regulating corporations, using the power of government funded by people?
I really appreciate your use of the word tosh, Jason. And I do think that one of the first steps that we can have into creating this change is making sure that our fellow countrymen are not dead. And so we do support the idea of getting the vaccine. And before we end the show, I would like to actually announce where you are able to get a vaccination within the city of Rochester. Last week, Mayor Warren and Adam Bello were encouraging city residents to get vaccinated in their neighborhoods. So over the next 2 weeks, anyone who is over or at least 16 and who lives in many zip codes in the city of Rochester, there's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not going to read them all.
If you live in the city, basically.
Pretty much, if you live in the city of Rochester, you can get a vaccination appointment at one of 4 neighborhood points of distribution. Generally, these are Thursdays through Sundays, and I am going to read the locations and the dates quickly. So at Baber AME Church at 550 Mig Street, well, that one was actually 2 days ago. Memorial AME Zion Church on Clarissa Street was yesterday.
We're getting there, folks. We're getting there.
We're getting there. The Greater Harvest Baptist Church on Friday, April 23rd. The Jackson R Center today, Saturday, April 17th. The Edgerton R Center tomorrow, Sunday, April 18th, or Sunday, April 25th next week. The Ryan R Center on Saturday, April 24th. And there is another location which will be announced later. So if you do want to get a vaccine, which can help us by keeping each other alive, and
I'm pro-life.
Then please reach out. There are a lot of resources for you to be able to get vaccinated. So please do that.
Yeah, and there's lots of other places to get vaccinated too on the New York State website for eligibility. Tons of places to get vaccinated.
And as a reminder, it is free. If you are asked to pay for it, it's a scam. You do not have to pay for it. You may have to show an insurance card if you have one, but you do not have to have insurance. You do not have to pay anything.
It's a free shot. But we got to end our show there, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. You can always stay in touch with us on our Facebook and Twitter handles at Radio EOD. You can find our past episodes on YouTube by searching for Evidence of Design or anywhere else you get your podcast. I was your host, Jason Taylor, joined by my good friends and co-hosts, Matt Treadwell.
See ya.
And Mary Lawrence.
Have a good one.
Until next time, be well, be safe, take care, and bye-bye.